Good afternoon and welcome everybody. I am super excited to be hosting yet another webinar delivered by iLearn. It's been some time since I did one with our community, and we've had a record number of registrations for this particular event. And I'm not surprised because we have the honor of chatting to Professor Bonang Mohale, who together with the My Mastery team has created an online masterclass on ethical leadership, which falls in line with two of Bonang's books that he's written. And today we're going to be chatting to the man himself and to unpack what it means to be an ethical leader. Not only a good leader, but an ethical leader. And I think within the context of the country, our history, and the journey that we've been on, there's never been a more important topic to cover and unpack and discuss. And then how do we interpret and inherit those traits in our everyday lives so that we can move the needle on creating a just society and an environment in which people can thrive under good leaders. So Bonang, thank you. Thank you for being with us today and for spending your time with us and for sharing your wisdom. And as part of the registration, we asked our community that registered to attend the webinar what they would like to ask you. So I've got a list of really great questions to lead us and to have a chat and a discussion around some of these topics. And to kick us off, I'm going to ask you a very important question that we got is, where do we start in our individual capacities to inculcate an ethical culture?
I want to remember your face so that when I meet you in heaven, I will be able to recognize you and be able to thank you once again. These authentically simple and yet profoundly gravid words are spoken by a little girl who's just received a wheelchair as one of 200 people from a Nigerian billionaire called Femi Otedola, and by so doing liberates Femi Otedola to experience for the first time in his life genuine joy and meaningful happiness. So if you encapsulate these words, however way you look at them, whatever your background is, your orientation and your religion or just a form of faith, it begins to talk to this notion of leadership, but most importantly of ethical leadership. By the way, leadership can be anything else but ethical, because for leadership to be present, we normally think of two things: some sort of a compelling vision, number two, integrity, and then number three is courage. The courage of your own conviction, the courage to speak truth to power. Richard.
Thank you, Bonang. And so, I think I want to give our audience some practical tips in our own environments in which we have different cultures and we have different ways of doing things in our businesses, and this idea of being ethical. Maybe you can give us some guidelines of what you would define as ethical and what you would define as unethical, and perhaps our audience can go away and implement one of these in their environments.
So first, you can't look at yourself in the mirror and believe that you are a leader if you then say, I've not been found guilty by a court of law. I am presumed innocent until proven guilty. That's for mere mortals. It's a lower standard. A higher standard that we subject ourselves to as leaders is the one that says, let's ensure that questions are not even asked. We subject ourselves to a measurement of morality, of principles, of higher standards. And I really just want to be philosophical whilst being pragmatic this morning. Not even the law is a good moral compass. Remember that the people who killed, in fact, who initially hid both Anne Frank and Bantu Steve Biko were breaking the law. But the policemen who killed both of them were obeying the law. So ethical leadership is about that discernment beyond just knowing what is right or wrong. It's the one that says none of us can be prosperous if we are only concerned about the self. It's about recognizing that leadership comes with power. Power reveals character. And what do we do with that voice once we have it? Maybe, just maybe, we use it to represent those without a voice, releasing better humans, deepening understanding when we help our people to graduate from just humankind to being kind humans, where kindness is the highest form of intelligence. When we move from important people to persons of significance, where, because we are business people, most of us, business is perceived not always taking, but often giving. Where as a people, we don't take ourselves seriously, but what we do seriously, where we demonstrate a high degree of deeply caring for each other and one another, and where we are meaningfully connected. Because you and I know that we are at our best when we serve others in this uniting bond of peace. You see, because peace is a precious gift, but also a fragile one. We should nurture with greater agency and intensity a culture of peace and stability in our communities, in our organizations, even in the continent. We want to be the reason someone feels welcome, seen, heard, valued, loved, and supported. Richard?
That's fantastic, Bonang. For those of you that don't know, iLearn has partnered with My Mastery, which supplies an online library or catalog of masterclasses, of which Bonang delivers a class on ethical leadership, where you can learn things like defining good leadership, liberating human potential, rethinking entrepreneurship, and my favorite, principles to live by. And I think as leaders, we are often challenged to continue to keep evolving and keep learning and keeping up with the times as our economies and markets and environments change. So the question we have here is how does a leader keep evolving and continue to be ahead of the times above everything else?
So first, by being prepared to unlearn, so that you can learn in order to relearn. It's about having insights today that are informed by hindsight in order to have better foresight. That, to me, is leadership. It's about all of us working very hard to assist and help in bringing about incredibly constructive citizens, where ourselves are catalysts of change, where we treat everyone with politeness and kindness, not because they are nice, but because you are, where the one with contentment is the one that's neither upset nor goes out of his way to upset others, where we are more mindful of the impact we have, because we know that 10% of conflict is due to just difference of opinion, but a whopping 90% is due to the tone of voice and delivery. So imagine of all the things that we could choose to be if we chose to be kind. It's about opening up space for learning. Here I'm talking about listening, active listening and learning, especially for the poor to be able to participate in the economy. You see, as a leader amongst equals, the higher up the corporate ladder you go, you want to be both accessible and friendly. You want to demonstrate that you are genuinely interested, that you don't want to miss the moment when you are in the presence of somebody else, where you open yourself to challenge, even about some of the most bone deeply held beliefs of yours to be challenged. Because we know that it is possible for two truths to stand side by side without my truth denigrating your truth. Let me put it different. Just because I'm right does not make you wrong. Can we help to solve intractable challenges of the country and the most vulnerable, so that most of our people are just able to fulfill their basic needs? You see, I'm not even talking about them reaching their fullest potential, just their basic needs. Where imagination is more important than knowledge, where we can have both speed and governance and accountability. Because we know, especially in government, when there's speed involved, because of the pandemic, we need to procure PPPs to save livelihoods. That's when people see opportunity to be corrupt. But what about this notion of unity in purpose, where we say no one must be left behind, where our job as leaders is to complement and augment, where we are in the habit of supporting ideas, not people, where one of the happiest moments in life for all of us is when you find the courage to let go of what you can't change. Richard.
Bonang, I know you've been very vocal about the corruption landscape within South Africa, and have spoken openly and challenged a lot of government representatives. And in fact, so we got a question from Kim, who represents a local government entity, who's asked us, how important is ethical leadership in improving or enhancing our service delivery? And where do you see that, and how do you see that being played out?
First, I think all of us must say fidelity to the law is sacrosanct. Where all of us want to preserve ancient wisdom and natural curiosity. Because you see, leadership is a privilege to better the lives of others, not an opportunity to enrich self. All the ANC manifestos talk about a better life for all. But now we know when they talk about a better life for all, they mean all of those of us who are elected into office, not the ordinary human beings. That's why they steal with absolute impunity. But I think we need to continue to demand ethical leadership, honesty, transparency, and this notion called final accountability. We must create a new culture of leadership by creating holding spaces where we say there is no prosperity for any of us if we are only concerned about the self. Because we know that ego is the enemy of leadership, the same way that panic is the enemy of progress, because arrogance is the camouflage of insecurity. It's not about having time. It's about making time, because if something is important to you, you'll go out of your way to make time. If something really matters to you, you'll make time. It's about also having the discernment, especially when you work for public office, about who's around you, but not with you. Because you see, weak people revenge, strong people forgive, but it's intelligent people that walk away. So I think all of us need to be clear that 28 years into democracy, it's now become apparent that this ANC-led government is incapable of self-correction. If you are going to wait for them to correct themselves, we'll wait a long time. It will be like waiting for Godot. You just have to read the Zondo report number 4. Remember the first report, 875 pages, took 4 years, 400 days of hearing, 384 witnesses at a cost of $1 billion, and it came in 3 volumes, just one report. So if you read report number 4, that talks about Bosasa, you come to one conclusion and one conclusion only, that actually it is this ANC-led government that is an organized crime syndicate. Richard.
That's quite a statement, and I personally would unfortunately agree. But yeah, hopefully with leaders like yourself, when I'm making an impact in the way that you do, we can turn that tide. Tell me, we've had such a significant paradigm shift over the last couple of years because of COVID-19. How would you define the new world that we live in, and as leaders, what do you believe we can do differently to further grow your agenda of uplifting people and establishing an Ubuntu culture within our businesses?
So first, it's about recognizing that there's no point in hankering towards the past, because we are from a bad, dark place, and not looking so much for a new future, but a better future, because you and I have co-created and co-crafted that future. It's about recognizing that we are living in a complex, uncertain, tumultuous world where there's an economic slowdown everywhere. And in fact, globally, I'm a member of the Committee of Chairpersons of the World Economic Forum. We've just identified 10 global risks. In the interest of time, I'll just talk about 3. Number 1 of that list, of course, it's this notion of the unprovoked, unjustified, and therefore unwarranted Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The second is the pandemic, and then the last one is climate change. But the confluence of all 3 has now resulted in hyperinflation, driven by the price of energy and food, because the world has not found a way to replace the 25% of fuel that is supplied by Russia, and almost 30% of the global grain, in particular wheat, that comes just from Ukraine, even though South Africa's economy is 2.5 times that of Ukraine, even though the continent of Africa has 60% of the arable land in the world. 28 of the 55 African countries are net importers of grain. So this European Union energy crisis is going to last several winters. I'm not English, but several means 7 or more, the same way that couple means 2 or more. So I think we need to tighten our belts. When I accelerate to our continent, Africa, this is God's own country, blue skies, African sunshine, of 1.3 billion people, the same population as India. 55 countries that speak more than 3,000 languages, where every mineral that the world needs, not once, it's not number 22 or 25, but number 1 and number 2. And yet when we talk of poverty in the 21st century, poverty still has primarily a black and feminine face. When we talk about the world that is now 8 billion people strong, and 1.4 billion of these people have absolutely no access to any form of energy whatsoever. 648 million of them are found in Africa. Here the sun shines more than 300 days a year, but we're not world authorities on solar energy. Germany is, with no more than 90 days. Where there are 3 of the mightiest rivers, including the mighty Zambezi, that pummels at Musiwa Tunya at a rate of 530,000 cubic meters, enough to generate hydroelectric power for the whole of Africa, and we'll still have access to export to Europe. So you can see that we are poor by choice, the type of leaders that we choose, not because the good Lord didn't give us abundantly. So in one line, I think Africa is rapidly running out of food, fuel, finance, and fertilizer. Globally, we know that South Africa has always been helped by global events. But even here at home, we now have new diction, new nomenclature. We're talking about load shedding. We should call it what it is. It's blackouts. For 14.5 years, we haven't been able to fix it, even though it started in February 2008. And yet we look at ourselves in the mirror and say we now want to be promoted to run the whole country. Now we're talking about water shedding. But it doesn't make sense because all our dams are more than 92% full. Cape Town, when it was pummeling towards day zero, their dams were 13%. Here, they are 92% full, and the failures in the reticulation, because the people who call themselves our leaders just failed to do planned and preventative maintenance, to maintain the water reservoirs, to maintain the pipes. There's 33% of water that just gets lost. You report it for a year, it's not being fixed, as if they can. So not only is electricity our challenge, but I think we should have been concerned more about a stable, reliable, predictable energy supply, not just Eskom. Have mercy for the province of KwaZulu-Natal. Even nature doesn't help. Floods 1.0 in Easter, 2.0 in May, but 50% of that water, had they cleaned the stormwater drainage of sand and overgrown grass, half of that water would have run off into the ocean and into the rivers. But sadly, 534 people were killed. But the 2 weeks in July, 19th of July, when we built 200 miles of a failed insurrection and rampant looting, we destroyed 1,400 ATMs, we stole 120 million rand, we banned 11 warehouses and 8 factories. The truck drivers' blockade has been happening for the last 5 years, especially along the N3 in the Moy River Toll Plaza, but also the Tugela. But even the construction mafia, some companies, even as early as this morning, say, we're going to withdraw out of KwaZulu-Natal because these marauding gangs called Amadela Ngubona are going to construction companies and say, you must give us equity for free. No, you can only hire people from our faction. For 5 years, we did nothing. Even funeral parlors, you cannot bury anybody in KwaZulu-Natal unless you are from KwaZulu-Natal yourself. Let me end, Richard, by saying, how does it manifest? It manifests at a place where now inequality is widening, racism is at an all-time high, Black graduates are roaming the streets hopelessly, public education has collapsed, public health care continue to fail the poor and the vulnerable. Crucial infrastructure is laying barren, and lawlessness has now become an epidemic. Richard.
Thank you, Bonang. A scary picture, but I know you've been very vocal with government in raising these issues. And if we look at it in the context of looking up to icons and leaders of our generation now, do you believe that we are where we are to a large extent because of the lack of good quality ethical leadership that we can aspire to, that has led to the general working population say, well, if they do it, so can I?
Absolutely, my dear brother. You see, Bob Garrett wrote a book 22 years ago titled The Fish Rots from the Head. The rod is straight up. So we had amazing leadership on the 27th of April 1994 when we stood in the snaking queues to usher in our first democratically elected president, Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela. He inherited a technically bankrupt South Africa. In 5 years, he quadrupled the GDP of this country. It was amazing. He then hands over to Thabo Mbeki in a seamless handover of power. The world does not see this often. People always want to cling to power and they want to have a state funeral. But he did. Thabo Mbeki went on to give us 43 consecutive quarters of positive GDP growth. So Mandela built, Mbeki continued. Mandela gave us a 2/3 majority, Mbeki gave us 72%. We could have changed the constitution if we wanted to, but because we are the rainbow nation, we didn't. The wheel started coming off 2007 on the way to Polokwane when we introduced money for the first time in the politics of the African National Congress. When we no longer listened to people's ideas and how they're going to improve the quality of lives, but as to who has paid me the most. And that is still continuing as we speak. So it's not a shortage of leadership. It's just that the people who went to Robben Island, we thought they were incorrigible and therefore uncorruptible. How wrong we were. Now it's easier to try and find the no more than people in the palm of your hand who are not corrupt than trying to articulate to those that are corrupt, because every day it's a new revelation. But I think leadership is also about saying, so what needs to be done, my dear brother? Very quickly, I think one of our most both systemic and systematic risk is youth unemployment. At 74.9%, I'm amongst friends. So I think at 75%, when you have young people of military age sitting at home, twiddling their thumbs and doing nothing, not only are you asking for trouble, but you are actively inviting it. Number two, the vaccine rollout. The Omicron subvariant has not disappeared. It's still with us. It's less virulent, less transmissible. At the end, it will look like a common flu, but it's still killing people as we speak. The president set us a herd immunity of 67%, of 60.1 million South Africans. That's 40 million people, which means we ought to have been vaccinating or inoculating at a rate of 100,000 a day every day. Had we done that, it would have taken us 400 days or 13.3 months, which means we're only planning to finish in 2012. When the president retired the Disaster Management Act, we had only fully vaccinated 30.3% of the population. You see, we can't look at ourselves in the mirror seriously and set ourselves targets that we know we have absolutely no intention of meeting. The NDP 2030, we had 30 years to diagnose the 11 things that are wrong and implement the 9 things that needed to be done. And tells us that with 7 years left, we are unlikely to meet any of these 9 things that we committed for ourselves. We built Midupi and Kusile and Ingula. We should have finished in 2014. The cost have quadrupled. This was supposed to, all of them, about 100 billion. They have cost us more than 300 billion. Now the president tells us that it needs another 19 billion just to finish Midupi. Unit 4 is still inoperable. We also need to reduce government debt, because at 95% debt to GDP ratio, for us is unaffordable. But remember, this excludes government guarantees to the more than 740 state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies. When you include guarantees to those, it goes to 110%. Now, when we need to be less susceptible to major risk events, we are now reprioritizing budget from one government to the other, because actually we are technically bankrupt. We need to reduce the public sector wage bill, because poor Edward Kieswetter at SARS, somebody needs to put himself on mute. We can hear their heavy breathing. Edward Kieswetter, of the 1.4 trillion on average that he collects from businesses and you and I, 70% of it goes only to 3 pots. One is social security. Number 2 is servicing debt. That's now approaching 20%, because we borrow at a rate of 2.1 billion a day every day. Number 3 goes to public sector wage bill. A good example as I end, Richard, you know, Van der Bijl, when he formed ESCOM, he did so with 17,000 people. He gave us 56 gigawatts of generation capacity. Nameplate, I'm talking about 17,000 people. During the height of state capture, that number went up to 48,000, almost 3 times more. But the available generation capacity, energy availability factor I'm talking about, is 27 gigawatts. So 3 times more for less than half. So nobody should tell us that ESCOM is not overstaffed. Today, as we speak, they probably have 47,772 people. So I think we need to be able to bring that total wage bill down, because we've got too many people in wrong jobs. And where we really need more people, we don't have them. We need more doctors, more nurses, more police women and men. And there they are few, because on paper, by the 19th of June 2021, when all of us were traumatized by this looting, on paper we should have had 200,000 strong South African police service. We didn't even have 180,000. They didn't have enough bulletproof vests, not enough rubber bullets, not enough live ammunition. In fact, they didn't have enough cars, period. That's why they stood by, folded their arms. And in those 8 days of rampant looting, the biggest damage didn't happen in day 1, 2, or 3. It happened on day number 4, which means had the police just pretended like they were taking action, they would have prevented the worst looting. Value Logistics warehouse was looted not for 1 day, but for 72 hours non-stop. Remember, it was during COVID. At 2100 hours, the Disaster Management Act kicked in. All of us were supposed to be in-house. We broke even that. We looted during the day, right through the night, for 3 days, and there was no action. So I mean it when I say lawlessness has now become an epidemic. Richard.
Like, it's a large macroeconomic issues, and that obviously affect all of us, whether now or in years to come. But to bring it to us as individuals in our own rights, in our own environments, how do we instill ethical leadership or good quality leadership within our environments to avoid this sort of behavior that you explained to be common practice?
So, Richard, by doing very practical things, you see, it must look different to break the cycle. You and I can have a garden service. You can have a cleaning company in our homes. But imagine if we chose to give that job to one gardener and one helper. We know that in South Africa, they look after a minimum of 5 other family members. That's how, one at a time, we restore people's self-worth and self-respect, because there is no nobility in being poor. As companies, instead of thinking of Black people and women-owned businesses as only fit for a tender for toilet paper, catering and cleaning, what if we gave them the electromechanical stuff? Let's buy our lifts and air conditioners from them, so that we are forced to give them not a 5, but a 10, 20-year contract for the maintenance of these lifts and the maintenance of these air conditioners. That's how you build a sustainable business, because it's about having access to the value chain. When you've got a contract from Pick and Pay for 10 years, even if you are thick, you will try and make it work. Most of our people have brilliant ideas. They just lack finance to put those ideas into place. Once they've borrowed money to be able to put them into place, they've got no market to sell it to, because they don't have the networks and the interfaces. So I think that's what we need to do, and that's what we can do. But it's also saying, you know, business itself is not very innocent. Even though we know that if this country is going to work, it's because business is going to make it work. I spoke about the Zondo Commission. Some of our own colleagues were called out by name as having aided and abetted state capture. So a serious intervention is needed to steer business back. because it is incongruent to speak of a just society when business is seen to be at the apex of injustice. What is needed now is bold, incisive leadership, which only business itself can provide. Especially now, I said the world is in a spot of bother. Richard, my dear brother. I mean, it's a bleak time for the global economy. It is undergoing tectonic quake where we see huge regime shifts. We see worldwide slowdown that we're talking about. China is having its 20th Communist Party conference that will only end on Saturday. They are projected to be going to slow down, which affects the whole world, including South Africa. These are troubled neighborhoods we are in with multiple crises. Because you see, the world was beginning to move away from financial stability, predictable financial markets, low interest rates, low inflation. Where we are now, these are turbulent waters because of exogenous shocks. Unpredictability has increased, but also volatility has increased. All of these are precipitated by the number of global things. I spoke a little bit about the pandemic and Russo-Ukraine conflict and climate change. But how do we evidence it? The supply chain constraints are everywhere. Labor shortages are everywhere. I mean, in one state in the US of A, they are running short of 200,000 bus drivers to drive kids to school. They are offering people all over the world a 6-hour week and they pay you in US dollars. We are seeing double-digit inflation. We're seeing increasing interest rates. The projection for GDP growth globally is about 1.1 to 2.7% GDP. So if I do simple arithmetic, if interest rate is say 13%, inflation, CPI I'm talking about, is say 10%, the GDP growth must be 3% for you to stand still, especially in South Africa because the population growth is 1.5. Globally, population growth is 1.1%. So we're now seeing increasing borrowing costs for governments and individuals. You pay more for your bond than for your car repayments. We are entering the 5th wave of public debt crisis. We're seeing increasing global commodity prices, but also reduced incomes, where eroding household purchasing power is everywhere. The cost of living is now in a crisis, leading to increasing poverty levels, increasing social tensions. Today we say worldwide, just in sub-Saharan Africa, there's 123 million people that are now facing serious hunger. There's an urgent need for fiscal coordination by the central banks of the EU, of the Fed in the US of A, of China, and indeed of Africa, where the European countries are now reviewing even their economic policies. Lastly, when we talk about the just energy transition, amongst others, is being seen as the best chance to return and for a return to growth in years to come. It's not useful when somebody says, no, but South Africa has a lot of coal. There's 10 towns around the Middelburg area which are on the cold belt. When they say that, we need to remind them that the Stone Age did not end because man ran out of stone. It ended because man found better and effective and efficient ways of doing things. Richard?
Bonang, thank you. What, given the state of that you just described the world to be in, could be quite depressing actually. And I think what I'd like to give our audience, because we have the unfair advantage of the South African spirit of what we like to call to make a plan and to get things done. What are the traits that you've seen in leaders that you look up to? And I'm sure there are many in our country that are doing unbelievably great work and make a significant impact. Where are you seeing that? Let's give our audience some positive stories about, you know, perhaps what are the, you know, the emotional intelligence skills and perhaps characteristics of humility that are leading people to do great things.
Absolutely. So over and above having a compelling vision, because leadership presupposes followership. So you need to give people hope. It was Napoleon Hill who reminds us that leaders are dealers in hope. You need courage of your own convictions to be prepared to lose it all for others. Lastly, you need integrity, wholesomeness. That's the one that's less sexy that we talk about. But remember that leaders start first by extending trust. They don't expect it. They extend trust. They start first with the who and then the what. Because if you surround yourself with good people, they will even help you to figure out the what. They find it easy to palate, highlight, and celebrate others because they themselves have been there, done that, they've got the t-shirt. And we contrast and compare it with management. When you start a business, that business depends on you. If you are there, it goes. If you go to the post office, it stops. But for this business to scale, you need to start being comfortable with delegating. Because if you now have offices in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal and the Western Cape, Gauteng is 30% of the national GDP, KwaZulu-Natal 16, and Western Cape is 14, you can't be in those three provinces simultaneously, concurrently, and in parallel. Therefore, you need to start trusting other people. That's when we say management is about getting things done through other people. But the real businesses that are sustainable in the short term to build this notion of long-term resilience are the ones where the owner says they can do without me. Then you know that you've done well. When you can go to bed and your people continue to do it as if you are there. Because management is what happens when you are there. Leadership is what happens when you are not there. So leadership is about paleting, highlighting, and celebrating others. It's about catching your people doing the right thing and standing on the rooftops and saying, look at what Memadi Khetsi has just done. Leadership praises publicly. It chastises in private. So I think what South Africa needs now, more than anything else, is the doing, the execution. We've got plans, enough plans. It's the doing. That's where we are coming short. It's General George Patton who reminds us that great wars are won by good execution, not great plans, because good execution will save even a mediocre plan. But you see, the pandemic has taught us many things. One of them is an African adage that says, when fisherwomen can't go out to sea, they repair their nets. So what are you and I doing to repair our own nets? Key relationships, significant others. Are we comfortable to go to bed knowing what our grandparents have eaten? Because you see, sons learn by looking at the back of the heads of their fathers. A child that's not enveloped by his village will burn it down in order to feel its warmth. Richard.
Thank you, Bonang. And I think, you know, there's a combination of areas that we need to uplift the people within our circle of influence. But I think what you said earlier, sort of quite frightening, is the unemployment rate amongst youth. So what do we as leaders, what can we do to those youth who often, I think in some cases, get branded with a sense of entitlement? How can we turn that tide to teach and imbue our young people that are coming into our organizations with a sense of humility and gratefulness and willingness and wanting to get the job done?
We need to model the type of behaviors we want to see in young people. That the higher up the corporate ladder of success we go, the more humble, the more accessible, the more friendly we are, the more human we become. We also need to take a chance on young people, because you and I were not born MDs. Somebody believed in us, gave us our first chance, counsel, coached, and held by the hand, and voila, now we can compete with the best in the world. You see, you can't learn swimming by reading a book. At some stage, you have to dip your big toe in the cold water. And when you do for the first time, you think you're going to drown and die and meet your ancestors in heaven. But after doing it for the 7th time, you realize that actually you can float quite effortlessly. It's like riding a bicycle. Therefore, let's have faith in young people. Let's back them. Let's take a chance of them. Let's give them opportunity for personal growth and development. Let's send them to school, those that didn't finish. Most of the senior Black executives I've worked with, they worked in gardens, in suburbs, to finance their education. And then they go and do first year at university, go back and work as a petrol attendant, save enough money, do the second year, and then go back and work. A 3-year degree would take them 6 years, not because they are thick, but because they just don't have enough funds. We need to break that cycle. And the way we break that cycle is to ensure that as business, we give bursaries to these young people so that they are paid only to study. NSFAS says 92% of the students in Fort Hare University are our NSFAS. 63% of them, after they've received this to pay for their tuition and accommodation, they take half of it home to support their parents, because without it, the family would die. You see, education matters, not because it's the surest way in which we can transcend social classes, but because it makes it possible for one to be born in Alexander. 6 square kilometers, 670,000 people packed like sardines, but 2 kilometers away across the bridge from the richest square mile in the continent. Even the tallest building in the continent, the Leonardo, is here in Sandton, taken over from the Carlton Center as the tallest building in Africa. When we give these kids an opportunity, then it becomes possible for them after 20, 25 years of hard work, of application, to afford a house in the leafy suburbs of Bryanston. Not because they want a tender, but because they've earned it, they can afford it, they deserve it. Because you see, when one steadily burns the midnight oil, one gains access to the domain of knowledge and wisdom, the world of meaning, the world that cannot be conquered without a persistent crusade. Since when did we say 30% is an acceptable pass mark? We went to school and we knew you had to get a minimum of 51%. So no, I don't know whether we are lowering standards or we are borrowing foreign concepts called outcome-based education that works best in developed countries like Canada, the US of A, and we bring it here where we are still a developing country. Because now, foreign converses pour from our lips, borrowed robes hang from our neck. We send our own students to learn medicine and science and engineering to Russia and China. And yet, some of the best universities in the world are found here. We've got 26 public universities. I'm excluding the TVET colleges, where we spend 50 billion a year every year with a 3% pass rate. Why? If the intent is not corruption in the first place. So for me, I love education, not because Nelson Mandela said so, but because you see, when you have an educated citizenry, you make it impossible to be fooled by unscrupulous politicians. Richard?
Bonang, we all look up to you as one of the great leaders in South Africa who's done so much and made such a big impact. Who are the leaders that you've looked up to in your career, and even so now, and who are those shining lights that we can hopefully depend on?
Shoot, there are too many to mention, my dear brother. I have been in the presence of dignified greatness from the black pool of excellence. I have admired people like Professor Lumkile Wiseman Nkuhlu, the first Black African chartered accountant, went on to teach accounting at the University of Fort Hare. People like Dr. Ruel Khoza, a businessman, an academic, a musician of note, who started a number of businesses and was the first chairman of Eskom when it was profitable, electrifying at a rate of 10,000 homes a day, every day. During his tenure, Eskom got the best prize for being the best utility in the world in New York. It was the fourth biggest utility in the world at that time, bragging about supplying the cheapest energy. That's how we attracted these aluminium smelters. But his greatest achievement was paying a dividend to government from Eskom. It sounds unbelievable. And Eskom had a rating by rating agencies higher than sovereign. I am motivated, energized, and inspired by people like the late Maduke Lot Ndlovu, who was the managing director of the Black Management Forum, went on to become its president, and then went on to become the deputy chairman of the Netco Group and the CEO of Permanent Bank, if you still remember Permanent Bank. But I'm inspired by my wife, Susan, who decided to get married to me at the age of 17. I don't know what she was smoking when she said yes. I'm also inspired by young people that I meet, like Katleho, a 23-year-old actuarial graduate from Wales who worked for Liberty and is now working for Alexander Forbes. I'm inspired by young people that, despite all odds, Bomezazini Molo at EmpowerWorks with Simpiwe Masiza are spending their time at Orange Farm to give hope to hundreds of young children, where they have workshops, mostly for an entire week, where they are not asking for any payment from these youngsters. I'm inspired by companies that are run profitably, effectively, and efficiently. A young lady works for Vodacom. Her name is Lusani Nemalili. Young as she is, still busy with her own master's degree, has no less than 8 people that she herself is mentoring, giving effect to this African adage that says, lift as you rise. Not once we have risen, but it's who we become in the process of succeeding. Because you see, at a personal level, we don't have to wait until we have the corner office or we have the title before we extend the hand down and lift another human being. It's about accepting that there is no exercise greater for the heart than continuously extending a hand down and lifting another human being as you rise. If you are a government, it's about saying the best amongst us lead with the heart of a servant, because servant leadership is not a leader with many servants. It says if you are a business, you need to continue to do well by doing good, because when business does well, society generally does well. You see, business can't continue to be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. Business has a disproportionate voice, and it must use that voice judiciously. Nature is a wonderful metaphor for business, because you see, there is nothing in nature that nature does and does for itself. Everything that nature does, it's not self, but the other-centered. That's why rivers don't drink their own waters. Trees don't eat their own fruit. The sun doesn't shine because itself needs the vitamin D. Flowers don't give off this wonderful fragrance because they themselves want to smell like Fontainebleau. The second title of my book is called Behold the Turtle, comma, he only makes progress when his neck is stuck out. We need to continue to risk it all. Because when the turtle is in its own shell, it's warm and comfortable, but it's going nowhere fast. For it to move from point A to point B and to make progress, it has to risk its neck out, with the possibility that a bird of prey might be hovering above, pluck its head and have it for lunch. But for it to make progress, it's a dance. It's literally a dance with death. Are we prepared to speak truth to power, irrespective of consequences? When a sitting president says, I could have spoken against state capture, but at that time, had I spoken, I would have been fired. But you're already a billionaire. Then what are we going to do as mere mortals who have bonds and children in private education to speak up and risk it all? These people that we call whistleblowers are the ones who told us what has been happening at GCIS, at Busasa, at the state-owned enterprises. Some of them lost their jobs. Some of them are not being hired as we speak. Those are the people that we should call heroes and heroines of our struggle, not the people that say we didn't go to struggle to be poor. Richard.
Bonang, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today. We've run out of time, unfortunately. We could speak for another hour. And I'm just so grateful that you agreed to participate and represent on the My Mastery platform, where you are sharing all these gold nuggets in a highly structured curriculum and online learning experience, with the intention of being able to democratize access at an affordable price point for all South Africans to learn from you directly. So for that, I'm very grateful. And to thank everybody for joining us today in this wonderful hour spent, and to please look out for further opportunities to engage with us and that of our team at iLearn. And I wish you all a wonderful, wonderful remainder of the year. Thank you, Bonang.